Welcome to the third episode of the Small Changes, Big Impact series brought to you by Hali Hewa Podcast in collaboration with the Africa SLCP Project. This comprises 11 podcast episodes with the aim of creating awareness on short lived climate pollutants. We want to help our audience understand what they are, why they're a problem, and what we can do about them. Short-lived climate pollutants not only affects the global climate, but are responsible for serious air pollution problems within Africa and affects you in your day-to-day life. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Richard Muita as our guest on the episode. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I will read out his bio and then we begin. Dr. Richard Rukwaro Muita is a professional meteorologist working at the Kenya Meteorological Department, KMD. He's also a GCRF postdoctoral researcher at the University of Nairobi, also affiliated with the University of Leeds in the UK. His research is on climate services and particularly user needs and perceptions of farmers on subseasonal and seasonal forecasts in Kenya. He has 22 years of operational forecasting, communications, training, and research experiences, and holds a PhD degree from the University of Sydney, Australia, a master's degree in integrated water resources management from the University of Dar es Salaam, and a BSc in meteorology from the University of Nairobi here in Kenya. His areas of specialization include weather forecasting, climate services, the dissemination and communication, and drought modeling for agriculture and other weather sensitive areas. We are so honored to have you today. It's not every day you get to interview a meteorologist. Um, is this something you've always wanted to do as a career, Dr. Muta?
Yes, indeed, and no.
Okay, interesting.
Initially, when I was doing my high school,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a lawyer. My second option was to be a medical doctor. And my third option was not to be anything else.
So you didn't have another
Yeah,
option.
but I finally ended as a meteorologist when I came to enroll at the university. I was unable to qualify for medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I qualified for law, but fortunately, I was good in both the sciences and the arts,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd really passed the sciences. And so when I was enrolling, they told me, "Well, why do you have to take law? And we are looking for people who have excelled in sciences. Please come join us, do something." So
Mm-hmm.
that's when I found meteorology, and I found it interesting because it is in the area of mathematics and physics, and that's what I really loved to work on.
Mm-hmm. For most of us, our understanding of meteorology is that weatherman on the TV station explaining the rainfall patterns. So, kindly help us understand what meteorology is and how it affects us or influences our day to day lives.
Yeah, meteorology is basically the science that studies the issues of atmospheric patterns
Mm-hmm.
or characteristics,
Yeah.
including what happens on land, what happens in the air,
Mm-hmm.
and the interactions therein. So possibly you would see rainfall falling from the skies, but it did not start there. It started somewhere on the surface, on the oceans. The oceans warmed up. The water rose through evaporation and other processes, and then it formed into clouds, and
Mm-hmm.
then the clouds came down.
Yeah.
But now the interesting part of meteorology is the physics in it, the mathematics. All that you see in nature is defined by mathematical and physical laws, what we in a layman's language we call equations. So even a cloud that you see as an ordinary person out there, when you look at it, there's a lot of physics and mathematics in there. So in meteorology, we try to represent, to represent those relationships such that at what point will a cloud be able to give rain? At what time will wind blow from one location to another? What time will the radiation or the solar, the sunshine that comes down from the solar system to the ground, at what time will it cause the temperatures to rise? And how is that process about? So that's, in a nutshell, that's basically what we talk about meteorology. And it comprises many fields. There is a bio, there's a physical, there's a chemical, and so many others.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I know our audience right now will be lost if we keep going into details about
Oh,
the
yeah, sure.
science. And so on this episode, or rather on this series, we are looking at air pollution and short-lived climate pollutants. So, what does forecasting tell us about SLCPs or short-lived climate pollutants and air pollution, and is there any relation in that regard?
Yeah, short-lived climate pollutants is a general term that is used to describe um, gases
Mhm.
or air chemicals, or pollutants,
Mhm.
which once released into the air or into the atmosphere, they stay for a short period of time compared to the more traditional greenhouse gases.
Mhm.
So, short-lived climate pollutants include gases like, particulate matter, black carbon. I think people know more of the black carbon. The soot you see if you go to a rural household
Mhm.
when they are using firewood, and there's a lot of smoke. And when you look at the walls, the roof, it's black. That is black carbon, and
Mhm.
black carbon is part of the short-lived climate pollutant.
Yeah.
When you look at things like methane, it is part of the short-lived climate pollutants,
Mhm.
and you find that they do not last so long in the
Atmosphere.
atmosphere. They would last maybe even up to 1 year or just a few months, and then they dissipate or
Mhm.
disperse. But contrastingly, greenhouse gases can stay for years, many years. And that's why when you listen to the global forums and debates, they talk so much about global warming, greenhouse gases, and less about short-lived climate pollutants.
Mhm.
But the truth of the matter is that even short-lived climate pollutants also contribute to the issue of
Global
climate
warming.
change or global warming.
Mhm.
So basically, in forecasting those, we just try to see how best can we represent them. Because at the end of the day, short-lived climate pollutants go into the atmosphere.
Mhm.
They join with the greenhouse gases, and the overall effect, global warming,
Yeah.
and of course, on the surface, other health problems and issues.
Mhm. Before we started recording, you spoke about the issue of our cars and the vehicles that we drive. And you said the issue is not really the vehicles that we drive, rather than how we maintain them. So, could you kindly shed light on that as well? Because I thought it's very important for our listeners to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I guess I'll use the urban areas in Kenya,
Mm-hmm.
particularly the capital city, Nairobi, and also Nakuru County, which also became a city just the other year.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that from what we have been observing, we have been carrying out monitoring and quantification of short-lived climate pollutants in Nairobi and Nakuru, and of course 6 other counties in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have noticed is that for Nairobi and Nakuru, the issue of vehicular emissions, that is emissions from vehicles or any other moving machine, whether it's industry,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a motorbike, whether it's a small car, whether it's a truck or a bus or whatever it is. Those are the ones we are terming as vehicles, and what they emit is what we call vehicular emissions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things vehicles emit is black carbon. The other is part of the particulate matter, whether it's PM 2.5, PM 10. They also release things like nitric acid, gases, sulfur, and a myriad others that they release. And from what we have observed is that according to the concentrations right now,
Mm-hmm.
you find that out of 10 vehicles that are on the road, about 7 of them are actually emitting what you normally see as a black smoke. And that, of course, contains a lot of these short-lived climate pollutants or gases like black carbon, the PM, and others. And that's a very worrying trend because you would wonder why would vehicles in such a big capital where you have close to 5 million people, in Nakuru you have close to 3.5 million, a population of 3.5 million people, why such a large number of vehicles would be emitting, these emissions on a daily basis. And one time, very early in the morning, I was passing through the city and along Thika superhighway, and I could barely see ahead because there was this kind of a haze, something that you can't see through. So it reduces the visibility, meaning that um, there is a problem with the issue of maintaining vehicles in the capital city and also in other urban areas, or generally speaking, in Kenya, because vehicles, if they are well maintained, they cannot smoke, they cannot emit what we see. But it seems either there are no regulations or there is no kind of something that is checking on this. And I think it's a worrying trend, because if we go into the details of how much are the concentrations, then we might be shocked, because the levels are quite mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then I hope our Kenyan listeners have had that. And we move to the early warning systems, which, whenever we talk about climate change issues, we never fail to talk about early warning systems as a good adaptive measure. So, kindly explain to us what those things are and, how they relate to climate change.
Yeah, early warning systems is just a collection of the tools and services
Mm-hmm.
that provide warnings or the state of the weather
Mm-hmm.
and how the weather patterns would evolve and what they mean. And just as you have seen the issue of early, it means that you provide that service in terms of how the weather looks like and how it is expected
Mm-hmm.
to evolve maybe in the coming future. It could be in a few hours. It could be now, what we call now casting.
Mm-hmm.
It could be in a week's time. It could be in a month's time. It could be at a seasonal scale,
Mm-hmm.
or it could even be at long term. Like 1 year, you can give a projection of 1 year,
Mm-hmm.
or even more than 1 year when you talk about climate change projections, because climate change is not a short
Yeah.
time scale thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so early warnings are the ones that provide what you should know in terms of this is what is expected. The temperatures are supposed to go this direction.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be a probability or the likelihood of rainfall and how much
Mm-hmm.
and up to when, starting at what time and maybe possibly ending at what time,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the impact. For instance, if we say that we expect heavy rainfall in Nairobi in the next 1 week, what is the impact? Maybe some areas will flood.
Yeah.
Some areas may experience what we call maybe landslides. Some areas, if we are talking about Kisii, the Lake Victoria Basin region,
Mm-hmm.
like Kisumu and other areas, you are talking about lightning or thunderstorms
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So early warnings are there to provide that service
Mm-hmm.
where you are informing people or sectors so that they can take the right action
In
as
case.
early as possible. They can prepare in earnest, awaiting what is expected from the early warning that has been provided.
Mm-hmm. When we look at the African continent, would you say the early warning system has been effective? And are there concrete examples of their successes or shortcomings?
Yeah, by and large, I would say that early warning systems have come a long way from the time when we were embracing uh, methods which are quite, traditional and not
Traditional.
very complicated,
Yeah.
whereby people are using like analog methods of forecasting. For instance, where people would just say, because yesterday it rained, so today it will rain. That's just so broad.
Mm-hmm.
Because it has been dry, we also expect next week to just be dry.
Yeah.
But right now, over the years, you find that early warning systems in Africa have grown such that now we are able to use other scientific methods and approaches which are more accurate and also able to describe the atmosphere and all the interactions with the surface and the oceans in a better way. Whereby right now we have what we call numerical weather prediction systems, which of course use the relationships in the atmosphere, like the cloud physics, the other patterns and different equations which actually describe what is expected to happen and also the issue of the evolution of the satellite, the satellite technology, whereby we have geostationary satellites in the atmosphere, which, go around the globe. And as they go, they relay that information to ground stations, where now we process that information, interpret it, and now put it in the early warning systems in order to run and see what we expect. So I would say that generally the early warning systems in Africa are fairly good. On average, for the entire continent, I would say on average 60 to 80% accuracy. In some areas, it could be higher. However, the greatest challenge that we have in ensuring that the early systems become better is the issue of lack of sufficient observation network on the ground. Because despite that the satellite will give you the entire globe, that information from satellite is not accurate. It is biased, it's uncertain. In order to make it more usable, you need ground stations where after you have observed, you can be able to do something we normally call calibration, or you validate those satellite information such that they become more accurate to the realistic terms. And therefore, when you run your models with that, then you are able to get more accurate early warning forecasts and systems. Yeah.
I was actually going to ask whether in your mind you already know what can be done to make the system more accurate. And when I was reading out your bio, you talked about the communications aspect, especially to farmers, because rightfully so, we come from a country that practices agriculture maybe as a main source of livelihood. So are there communications channels apart from mainstream media, which we always see, that ensures the people that need this information the most actually get it? Are there any other communication channels apart from the mainstream media?
Yeah, that's a good question. First, let me handle the first part where you talked about the challenges
Yeah.
and what can be done to improve the early warning systems.
Mm-hmm.
I already mentioned about the sparse network.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can be done is if there can be more investment
Yeah.
into expanding the network, put more stations,
Yeah.
more automatic observation platforms so that we can get ground-based data.
Mm-hmm.
The other, of course, is about improving the capacity in Africa, which is still low. Like train more meteorologists, train more, climatologists, train more communicators and disseminators of information, create more, and at the back end, also create capacity with the end user.
Yeah.
Because sometimes the end users could be ignored. While in actual fact, when you build their capacity, they are able to adopt or uptake the early warning services, the forecast, and so on in a better way. And at the end of it, also put or make the best decisions based on the information provided. So those are some of the challenges that require to be kind of built. When it comes now to communication and dissemination, that forms part of what I was doing in my postdoctorate fellowship, and I started the perceptions and the user needs that are required, and part of the perceptions and the user needs that I was able to research on is about communication and dissemination. Some of the communication and dissemination modes that we have. So you'd find that they vary from the mainstream, where you have radio and television, and now you find that social media platforms are growing Because like in Kenya, for instance, the subscription of people with smartphones or mobile is close to 70 million subscriptions, meaning that some people have 2 or 3 phones. In the rural areas, people have the kabambe, the small, kind of mobile phone, just to communicate. And so you find that in terms of communication and dissemination, those modes are coming out very strongly. At the rural setup, or talk of Kenya, the sub-county, the ward, the village, you find that there are those traditional ways of communication and dissemination which are still relevant up to date. Issues like the barazas, the village meetings, you find that they are still very, very, very strong and relevant at the moment. And even ordinarily, like from a perspective of the corporate, you find the forums like workshops and seminars and so on. Those are also other means through which we communicate. But overall, I was able to look at what is the most preferred mode of, communication or disseminating this. And interestingly, radio stood out across the entire country. That most people, whether they are educated, whether they are semi-educated, or at whatever level they are, in the rural, radio still stands out because they broadcast mostly in vernacular languages, the language that you can easily associate with. And so you find that while the social media platforms are also coming, out very strongly, particularly Facebook, also WhatsApp. Interestingly, you'd find in counties, sometimes you find a WhatsApp with a group of farmers. Like in Moranga, I know a WhatsApp group where they have a group of farmers, 6,000 of them. It's You can't fathom that so many people, and any moment you get information, it reaches them before the mainstream media are able to air this. And so I think there is quite it's kind of like a revolution within the issue of communication and dissemination for early warning.
No, I think that's a really brilliant study, and knowing that this important information still gets to the people that need it the most through
Sure. Yeah.
various channels. And now let's look at air pollution issues. And you mentioned earlier that you have done measurements in quite a number of counties, Nairobi, Nakuru. In very simple terms and in a on a more general note, what would you say is the air quality of most Kenyan cities?
Yeah, we considered Nairobi and Nakuru
Mm-hmm.
for cities,
Mm-hmm.
and then for non-cities or other counties, we considered 6 of them, which include Nandi County. We have Taita Taveta, we have Garissa, we have Murang'a, we have Kajiado, and 2 more others. And what we have found out in Nairobi and Nakuru is that in most of our major highways, the pollution levels are incredibly high.
Mm-hmm.
And they range between about 5 micrograms, depending on the time, and even more than 100 micrograms per cubic meter, depending on where you are and the time.
Yeah.
There are times when the traffic is high on a particular point, and that is the time that you could register or observe the highest levels of these pollutants. Um, when it comes to the rural counties or areas, we focused more on what we call indoor pollution. That is what comes from inside the house, particularly from the kitchen, whereby they are using what we call biomass. In a general term, people use firewood. People use other, other residues, either from crops and so on. I remember we used, excuse me, we used, dried kind of cobs from the maize cobs, for part of the biomass. You use the stalks which have dried in the farm. Sometimes you use grass, some twigs, and so on.
Yeah.
So those are the ones that are used in the kitchen. And so we were measuring and quantifying what is coming from the kitchen when they are cooking. So most of the emissions we collected were basically what happens in the morning when they are preparing breakfast, lunch time, and evening. Yeah, and still the levels were quite high, depending on which household and what they are using. And this could go even up to, in some areas, could even go up to 100 micrograms per cubic meter uh, overall as the maximum. Other periods it could be less. Like it also goes with the weather conditions. Because when it's very cold, there is a tendency of using more biomass, not only for cooking but also for warming.
Yeah.
So, and the same is true even if you look at what we call clean energy or renewable energy or even electricity, for instance. Yeah, when it is cold, you are likely to use heaters. You are likely to use more of the AC and so on. And therefore, we saw that the levels, even in the households, were incredibly high. In some instances, they were low, maybe 10, 20 micrograms per cubic meter. But I would say that overall, we wanted to compare these concentrations levels to what is provided for as the standard by the World Health Organization and also our country national standards, perhaps provided by NEMA. And we realized that most of the levels surpassed those levels. Because recently I saw that the WHO has revised the standards from the previously 25 micrograms per cubic meter as the threshold that you should not go above that. Now they have brought it down to 10, which of course is very, very, very worrisome, because if you are reducing it and the levels are high, even above the 25, most are above the 25 micrograms per cubic meter in most of our highways, and maybe even in where people are densely, populated, then it means that we are actually in a very bad state overall.
Yeah. And you also talked about a study that sort of compares the air quality between Nairobi and Kigali. That there's a graph that you're going to share on the video as well. So kindly shed light on that as well.
Yeah, sure. This is something I got from some friends working in similar projects
Yeah.
from the US and working with the Regional Center for Mapping and Development here in Kenya. You see, that's an IGAD affiliated institution which covers most of the countries in the Horn of Africa. And they had carried out this study to compare cities. And I was fortunate to see the comparison between the Nairobi and Kigali, emissions, particularly for particulate matter 2.5. And incredibly, at that time, the levels in Kigali are slightly higher than in Nairobi. Amazingly, we know that the population in Kigali is high, but not as high as in Nairobi. The number of vehicles in Kigali are not as many as the ones in Nairobi, where we are talking about more than 1 million cars, dominating our roads in the capital city, Nairobi. And it was kind of a temporal distribution over time. And you could see that the levels were rising. If you had to put what we call a trend line, like even using a linear regression trend line, you'd find that there was an upward movement with the time, meaning that there was no time that it went down.
Yeah.
But over that period, it just increased, which to me is a very worrying trend. And you could see, the levels reaching up to even 80 micrograms per cubic meter, close to 100, um, averaging around 50, around 40 something. And so to me, those levels for the urban cities or the capital cities of these two countries are really very high. And I think it's a high time that very urgent, very, very urgent and serious action should be taken in terms of mitigating and reducing that. Because we know if we go into details in terms of the impact of this on health, it can be a big, it can cost the government and even the population, quite a lot if it's not curbed early enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, thank you so much for highlighting the health aspect
no worries.
of the PM 2.5. And as we are about to wrap up, there's this particular question I really wanted to ask, which is KMS is currently developing a weather research and forecasting with chemistry model for early warning systems and forecasting of SLCPs in order to integrate air pollution information into the National Meteorological Services. As we finalize, kindly shed light on that.
Yeah, thank you, Abigail. That is part of the output we expect from a 1 year project
Mm-hmm.
that was generously funded by Climate Works Foundation uh, of the US. And one of the things that we wanted to provide is an early warning service, which would help with regard to estimating the levels of short-lived climate pollutants in urban areas.
Mm-hmm.
We are focusing on Nairobi and Nakuru counties for
Mm-hmm.
the simple reason that the initial or first phase of the project was about just collecting the information, seeing the status as I elaborated earlier.
Yeah.
But now we want to see, can we use that information and any other existing information to come up with an early warning, which can be used as a tool to advise policy, can be used as a tool to educate the masses, the population, with regard to what are the levels, what decisions can you take. And so we opted to use something we call the weather research forecasting with chemistry tool. This is a research tool. It is also a forecasting systems tool, which you customize according to your need.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, our need is to try and see whether we can be able to predict and forecast some of the short-lived climate pollutants elements, such as particulate matter 2.5,
Mm-hmm.
black carbon, particulate matter 10, and that's exactly what we've been doing. And we have already developed some parts because initially you have to build the model from scratch, whereby you have to look at the area, what are the meteorological parameters or aspects that you think are important in prediction. And in this case, satellite information and resources become very important
Mm-hmm.
because I talked about the geostationary satellites. So they observe some of these components in the atmosphere, what the carbon dioxide is, what the other gases are, what is the wind regime, and so on. And now that combined with the ground, stations data, we are able now to initialize that model. That is the WAF-CHEM model,
Mm-hmm.
and we are able to do runs. And in this case, we have started working on a 3 hourly kind of early warning forecast for PM 2.5 and PM 10. And we just in the initial stages. We are yet to still continuously improve on the quality of that.
Mm-hmm.
At the back end, we expect to come up with a dissemination and communication framework because we need to understand how best do we communicate this information. This is something that is new in Kenya. It has not been done before.
Okay.
And so we want to see whether we can get it right
Mm-hmm.
so that we can later, after the project is over, we can now integrate it within the National Meteorological Service, which provides all the other myriad types of early warnings, whether it is drought, whether it is malaria warning, whether
Mm-hmm.
it is any other warning, such as maybe the current rains that are hammering the country. And so, towards achieving that, we are building capacity so that we can have people who can continuously be running these models, improving these models, run these models. And so we are just somewhere almost 50% of what we are doing. And we hope by the turn of the end of the year, we should be able to provide a full suite of the WAFCAM, early warning system.
Yeah. Well, this all sounds very interesting. And I hope someone listening will be inspired to become a meteorologist or a climatologist and every other career related to this. So, on this podcast, as we wrap up, we always ask our guests what are the two actions that people can take at a personal level to reduce their emissions with regards to SLCPs? Something very simple off the top of your head.
Yeah, one, let me talk about the rural population because they are the ones highly affected by indoor
Mhm.
emissions because they cook using biomass. Perhaps it's not their wish. Um, I would urge that they strongly talk with the governance structures in their area that they can accept to help them get subsidized kind of clean energy, such that we also even reduce the pressure on our forests and on our environment,
Mhm.
so that if they can adopt energy saving and cleaner stoves, it would even save them some money. That's number one. Um, in the long run, we need to have an establishment of air quality monitoring
Mhm.
because that's largely lacking. It's haphazard. It's like in this project, we had to buy some of those sensors. But you see, those are not sufficient. We need something that is concrete, like an agency like NEMA or Kenya Meteorological Department would take over and establish a network across the country so that we can improve the early warning system or services so that now we can be able to provide. The last one has to do with the legal and legislative and other regulatory, which of course all add to the policy issue. It is a high time that we need to come up with the policies which clearly help to implement the issue of how we reduce the emissions and the pollutions because it's part of our national determined contributions, which of course flows into what we call the Conference of Parties and all these other global agreements, whereby now we are looking at reducing the levels of the global warming or the emissions to the level of the Paris, the 2015 Paris Agreement,
Mhm.
that if we can limit this by 2030 to the level of 1.5 degrees Celsius,
Mhm.
so that we will be safe. Because if we go beyond that, we are likely to continue seeing more of climate change and impacts that will affect much of what we do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you for also highlighting the target for 1.5 because in this space we almost feel as if it's an impossible thing to achieve if we continue to what do you call it, business as usual.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thank you so much. I don't know if you have anything else you'd like to add that you feel I haven't.
Not really. It's
uh
just to thank you for having me.
mhm,
And we hope that we'll engage more with the communities to educate them
mhm.
on what they should do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, this was Hali Hewa Podcast, episode 3, in collaboration with the Africa SLCP Project. See you on the next